What's up, YouTube? We back again with another video, and this one's gonna be another one on the infographics reacting to why Putin is scared of NATO sending tanks to Ukraine. Putin considers us sending tanks to Ukraine direct involvement in the war. So we will see what comes of that. But let's get into the video. Hope y'all. Hey, we're on the road to 750 subs. Make sure y'all drop a sub if you enjoy this content. And make sure y'all comment if you want to see me react to anything. Let's get into it.
For heavy combat vehicles since the start of the invasion, and it seems as if its wish is about to come true. Western tanks could spell disaster for Putin's invasion, which is why he's worked so hard to scare the West into not sending them. At the start of the invasion, Ukraine had around 2,500 armored vehicles, all of which were Soviet-era models. Generally outclassed by Russian equipment, Ukrainian equipment was on the whole older and less capable, putting them at a serious disadvantage. However, an influx of hundreds of Western anti-tank missiles and the defensive nature of the initial invasion helped to move the loss ratio firmly into Ukraine's favor, with Russia taking significantly more losses per combat engagement. Still, as a percentage of their total fleet, Ukraine was suffering catastrophic losses, with some figures estimating that Ukraine has had nearly 100% of its starting fleet of vehicles destroyed, damaged, or captured. Many of these would end up being repaired, but an even greater boon to Ukraine was the hordes of vehicles left behind by retreating Russians. In short order, Russia quickly became the largest donor of military aid to Ukraine, which is a terrible way of winning a war. However, Ukraine is only capable of manufacturing small numbers of domestic armored vehicles due to its small arms industry and the fact that a lot of it's been destroyed in the war. The small number of defense plants in Ukraine were a top priority target for Russia, which on most days can't hit the broadside of a barn from 10 feet away. But when you have as many missiles as Russia originally had going into the war, odds are you're eventually going to hit what you're aiming at. The taking of important industrial cities in the east.
That was crazy too, because how they started out the war, hitting out all the communication buildings and all that, and hitting military infrastructure. They, like I said, war ain't cool or whatnot, but they had the winning strategic plan. Where they fucked up is, like everybody says, the logistics of it.
East also seriously hampered Ukrainian manufacturing, as generally speaking, the East is Ukraine's industrial sector, and the West is mainly used for farming. Unless they figure out how to make tanks out of wheat and barley, Ukraine would inevitably be in serious trouble, and no number of anti-tank missiles from the West could stop that. Anti-tank missiles, after all, can't defeat entrenched infantry, nor take and hold ground. At the start of the war, most of the West believed the Russian hype and was sure that Ukraine would fall within days, weeks at most. This is why it's
I'm gonna be honest, I was one of them people. I thought it was gonna be about, I gave it about a week, and boy, shit's crazy. Turned around like crazy.
Fair to criticize the West for not moving faster to provide aid for the nation. It makes no sense to send equipment to an army in a fight it's inevitably going to quickly lose. At the start of the war, the West's strategy was to make the Russian army suffer as badly as it could in its invasion, not believing it could be truly stopped. Man-portable anti-tank missiles and air defense systems accomplished this with great success, taking a massive toll on Russia's armored forces and decimating as much as a quarter of its attack helicopter fleet. The combat environment became so deadly for Russian helicopters that even today the mighty Ka-52, a truly capable and fearsome attack chopper, is only good as an inaccurate aerial artillery platform, forced to launch volleys of rockets in a pitch-up maneuver well outside of the range of enemy manpads. However, as the Kyiv offensive stalled out and then ended in a total retreat, the world realized Ukraine.
That's where they lost this war too. That's what's crazy, is when they tried to take Kyiv and didn't get it and bailed out. That's where they lost all their momentum. But like I said in my last video, half these people fighting for Russia don't even want to fight for Russia, so that's why they're losing.
Could actually win this thing, or at least it could hold out long enough and inflict enough pain on Russia that the nation would be forced to settle for a very limited victory. The request for heavy combat systems was finally being answered, though with disappointing results. Instead of the battle tanks Ukraine was asking for, the US sent the antiquated M113 battle taxis and Humvees. European nations largely followed suit, mostly sending artillery and some air defense equipment. The West had entered a self-deterrent Ouroboros cycle, intimidated by Putin's nuclear rhetoric, and this was exactly Putin's goal from the start, and why he made so many TV appearances talking around the possibility of using nuclear weapons without ever confirming nor denying that he would use them in the Ukrainian conflict. Western leaders collectively browned their pants at the thought of Putin going nuclear, and now
all I know is if Putin was to use nuclear weapons, A, it's going to be World War III, and B, there's going to be so many nukes flying after that, it ain't going to be funny.
every single proposed shipment of Western equipment was put under extreme scrutiny by the entire NATO alliance. When the US provided HIMARS, some EU leaders thought it entirely too provocative, which is why it initially only sent a dozen or so of the weapon system. This long-range artillery, however, proved to immediately be incredibly effective, prompting the US to send more. And yet, HIMARS' effectiveness worked against Ukraine's wishes for more of the platform, as well as serious hardware like Western tanks. The mobile 6-missile rocket artillery was able to deliver precision firepower that devastated Russian logistics and command and control networks, killing many senior Russian officials. Its high mobility then allowed it to escape Russian artillery reprisals and attack helicopters hunting them down. The use of cheap plywood decoys led to Russia claiming to have destroyed approximately 300% more HIMARS than the US had actually sent. All this was putting Russia in a very
They hit him with the okie doke. That's hilarious. Russia's just failing in pure just strategical aspect of the war.
bad position, exploited to great effect by the September counterattack that retook massive swaths of the East. Putin once more amped up the rhetoric, and in return, the West once more browned its collective pantalones as news anchors moaned about escalation in nightly broadcasts. This ensured that there would be no chance of Ukraine getting the tanks it so desperately needed and wanted. Ukraine simply couldn't win too hard against Russia because it was hurting Putin's feelings. What the escalation narrative fails to take into account, however, is that Putin has already escalated multiple times in his war against Ukraine. More to the point, Putin's nuclear rhetoric is exactly that. Tough-talking, saber-rattling meant to scare Westerners, when in reality even Putin isn't stupid enough to turn this losing war nuclear. The US has already promised catastrophic conventional consequences, and unlike Russia, its military actually, works. Plus, in order to have any real effect on the war, Putin would either have to use strategic nuclear
He said, hell no, he caught up with that.
weapons against major population centers or dozens of tactical weapons against troop formations. Either move would turn Russia into a global pariah, completely cutting it off from the global community and destroying it economically and politically. The West is finally sacking up, though, and we have Britain to thank for that. For the last few months, it's been extremely clear that the West needed to act extremely soon if it didn't want to see Ukraine's gains in September completely reversed in the coming spring. This is because Russia might have suffered truly apocalyptic losses in men and equipment, but its stockpiles of both are very deep. It might not be bringing the best gear to the fight by a long shot, but it's bringing a lot of it. And Ukraine's losses are no longer being replenished by captured Russian vehicles. In short, the West needs to act immediately if it wants to have Ukraine tank crews trained and prepared for the spring fight. Poland, probably because it's the closest to the fighting and historically has been savaged by foreign invaders, was quick to offer up its Leopard 2s to Ukraine, but it needed permission from Germany. As the Leopard 2 is manufactured in Germany and exported under license, Poland would need to secure permission to send the tanks to Ukraine as a term of its purchase agreement with Germany, but also to ensure the flow of replacement parts for repairs and maintenance. However,
How you let another country own your tanks? That's crazy.
Germany was hesitant, much as the rest of the West, as no nation wanted to take the lead in providing heavy equipment and being blamed for any potential, quote, escalation. In effect, while Putin was bleeding the Ukrainians dry, Western leaders were standing at the edge of the pool, anxiously daring each other to be the first to jump in. Finally, Britain said, "Hold my tea," and stolen cultural artifacts, and plunged in feet first, offering up an entire squadron, or 14 of its Challenger 2 tanks. The move immediately sparked a wave of outcry and whining from the Kremlin.
Planning a family? Check your sperm count. You can test it in your room. Morning, night, or
with Russian Federation spokesman Dmitry Peskov promising that Britain's Challenger 2s would burn just like the rest. Good luck with that, bro, because now Russian tankers operating mostly Cold War T-72s will be facing one of the best, if not the best, armored main battle tank in the world. The Challenger 2 is legendary for its ability to take punishment, a design feature that came about because of Britain deciding that the best way to win a tank fight was simply out-survive everyone else on the battlefield and going heavy on the defense. Now it appears as if the floodgates are slowly creaking open, with Germany under extreme pressure to allow the export of NATO Leopard 2s to Ukraine. The vehicle is absolutely critical for Ukraine and the only realistic option to supply the nation with heavy tanks. The reason why is because of logistics. There are approximately 2,000 Leopard 2s across Europe in the various armies of the EU's militaries. The US has a comparable number of Abrams tanks and could certainly afford to send a significant number, given that the only real conflict the US faces, war with China, would see extremely little, if any, ground combat. However, unless the US digs into prepositioned stocks, it would have to ship Abrams tanks all the way from the US to Europe, and even if it sends from its prepositioned stocks, like it has with 50 Bradley IFVs it recently sent to Ukraine, it still faces the task of
us sending tanks over there is going to help them. But how long can we help continue to help them directly and say we aren't a part of the war, though? You know what I mean? That's because I feel like in a way we are. Like, we're basically funding a war against Russia. However, today they just shot down a balloon that's supposedly been flying over South Carolina and over army bases. So I don't know. Some weird stuff's going on around here. China may be up to something.
Providing logistical support on the battlefield from an entire ocean and half a continent away. The Abrams is a notorious maintenance-heavy monster, and that's no surprise given it's one of the most advanced tanks in the world. But like most American equipment, it's a total prima donna, and only the world's richest nation can actually afford to operate it in large numbers. Which is why the Leopard 2 is integral to Ukraine. Logistics networks are local, allowing for much faster, cheaper, and easier resupply and maintenance for Ukrainian vehicles. Tanks damaged in battle could easily be removed and shipped across the border to Poland, where they could be fixed and then sent back to the battle in a matter of weeks. This is something that without significant investment in logistics networks, the US simply could not do with the Abrams. Simply put, the time to start prepping and sending the Abrams was when the war started, not when Ukraine needs tanks on the front lines in 2 to 3 months. Western tanks, whether they end up being more Challengers, Leopards, or even American Abrams, are a nightmare for Putin and his forces. Currently, Russia's replacing its destroyed T-90s, albeit extremely slowly. This means that the bulk of its armored forces consist of Cold War-era T-80s and T-72s. And most of the more modern versions of these have already been destroyed or graciously donated to Ukraine by retreating Russians running for their lives. This leaves Russian tankers facing the prospect of having to go toe-to-toe with semi-modern Western tanks, and we've already seen this movie back in the early 90s during the First Gulf War. The comparison is actually incredibly apt, because the West is unlikely to send its most modern variants, and instead send Leopard 2s upgraded to around the early 2000 levels at the most. But even if it sends its absolutely oldest models, Western tanks already proved their worth against their Soviet equivalents, with kill ratios between the two sides being best described as hilariously one-sided. The most likely variant to be sent to Ukraine is the Leopard 2A4, the most widespread version of the tank. This model began production in 1985 and ceased by 1992, with all previous versions updated to this standard. Featuring a digital fire control system and upgrades to its armor, the 2A4 is definitely dated, but likely to fare far better than its Russian counterparts, as the nation is forced to dig deeper and deeper into its reserve stockpiles. Whatever tank the West decides to send to Ukraine, however, it needs to decide to do it immediately. As spring nears, a new massive Russian offensive is expected, and Ukraine's stocks of armored vehicles are already running dangerously low. More to the point, Ukraine is fighting a war against Russia on behalf of the rest of the world, and a further dithering on the West's behalf, here's looking at you, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, is doing nothing but costing Ukrainian lives, both civilian and military. Ever wondered how we decide what to make videos about? We're gonna let you in on a little.
Hey. I mean, us sending the tanks that, I mean, that helps them a lot because that gives them a lot more mobility, like he was saying. Plus, I mean, with our tanks are the best tanks in the world. Let's be serious. Come on now. So they have a really high advantage. And I did see something the other day where Putin said that he does feel like with us sending tanks that it would be direct involvement into the war. I do believe at some point in time this will become World War III. I do believe that. I do not know when, but it's just the way things are going and the way things seem. It just seems like it's inevitable. But hope y'all learned something here. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. Until next time, I'll see y'all later. Peace.